uncovers corrupt machinations of the Supreme Court, like court accountability. I know all the Meidas Mighty is loving Mike Sachs, who works at Court Accountability. Well, we're bringing in the leader right here of Court Accountability, Alex Aronson. And what I really want to talk to you about is seeing all of these headlines right now about Opus Dei, this kind of sect within the Catholic Church. I'm not even sure it's been described as kind of cult-like, but that they've infiltrated the United States Supreme Court, and they're actually influencing a lot of these corrupt decisions that we are now seeing. Gareth Gore recently published a book, Opus, The Cult of Dark Money, Human Trafficking, and Right-Wing Conspiracy Inside the Catholic Church. Rolling Stone covered it recently. Opus Dei and the Moneybags Kid. In his new book, Opus, Gareth Gore examines the ties binding Supreme Court puppet master Leonard Leo and a radical, powerful Catholic organization. Also a recent article on this as well, how Opus Dei conquered DC. A new book shows just how much sway the mysterious right-wing Catholic group has and might have over Trump's next term. I think this is such a critically important issue that's not getting nearly enough attention. Lisa Graves, who works and leads the research arm from Court Accountability, was part of the kind of research firepower behind Gareth Gore's book right here. We got the leader of Court Accountability, Alex Aronson. First up, Alex, we want to have you more and more here on the MeidasTouch Network, on the Legal AF YouTube channel as well. And I want to try to start doing these daily hits because this is the stuff our audience wants to hear, but welcome.
Awesome, Ben. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be with you. It's incredible kind of how intertwined all of this has become. I come to this, as a lawyer, as a counsel on the Senate Judiciary Committee during the Trump era, when we watched this kind of new breed of extremist judges, folks like Matthew Kacsmaryk, Aileen Cannon, Brett Kavanaugh, all these extremists being confirmed to the court. And, one of the ties that bound all of them was their connections to Leonard Leo, the sort of dark money impresario of the Federalist Society, who we're now learning more and more about, thanks to this incredible book by Gareth, is deeply connected to Opus Dei. I think it's worth kind of getting into the details of what Opus Dei is and what Gareth uncovered, because it's really a wild story that runs deep into the power centers in Washington, D.C.
Well, in the lawyerly fashion, let's build our foundation, then let's get into its impact. First, the foundation. Tell us about Opus Dei. What is it? I mean, I read about it in the Da Vinci Code. At the end of the day, they were the ones who had the secret message that the Tom Hanks character was trying to kind of figure out. And with the Mary Magdalene pose, that's basically my knowledge of the Da Vinci Code 15, 20 years later. But tell us about this organization, then let's get into their specific impact on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, most folks know about Opus Dei only because of the Da Vinci Code, which really sensationalized it and fictionalized it. We had this kind of monk who was self-flagellating himself, and it was really wild and extreme. Turns out, like, this isn't all made up. There are those practices within this sect. It dates back to the 1920s in Spain, when a young priest sort of got a calling from God to create this new order. And much like Leonard Leo did with the Federalist Society, he started recruiting elites at law schools and other universities. He had a law and architecture organization that he was bringing folks in and sort of inculcating this idea. And really what they try to do, and which makes them different from other recognized parts of the Catholic Church, is that they have a huge lay membership, folks that in their day jobs work as bank presidents or lawyers or judges. And the whole idea, it's really kind of theocratic in spirit, is to bring God's word and to bring this work into civic society so that they can start to impose these far-right Christian values they have. And some of the stuff in the history of this book is wild, because they really took advantage of this fascist dictator in the 20s and 30s in Spain, Franco, who sort of is like a Trump-like character. They were able to infiltrate his regime by putting in Opus Dei ministers. And one of the main characters in this book is the president of this important bank in Spain, Banco Popular, which crashed in 2017. And Gareth Gore, a British financial journalist, was just assigned to kind of figure out what was happening with this bank collapse. He thought it would be sort of just an ordinary story of corporate malfeasance, but what he found was a secretive dark money syndicate. It called itself the Syndicate, that had deep connections to Opus Dei, that was, controlling the bank, including through this president, and funneling hundreds of millions of dollars out to Opus Dei centers and residences around the world. And the stuff he finds and describes and documents from these bank records and from folks that have really escaped Opus Dei and talked about it is a sort of a stunning web of abuse, power, and influence across the world and in the United States.
So Opus Dei, great description there. Remind our viewers, many probably know who Leonard Leo is in the Federalist Society, and we hear his name in a lot of our MeidasTouch reports on the relationship with Clarence Thomas and picking these right-wing justices and right-wing federal judges and reshaping the judiciary in this very radical and extremist way. Has taken away people's freedoms and replaced it with this kind of Christo-nationalism, however you want to describe it. But give us that description, then let's marry the two and describe how this Opus Dei is using their money or funneling money to influence our court system.
Sure. So Leonard Leo is the moneybags kid described in that article that Gareth put in Rolling Stone. He was, until recently, a sort of a very unknown figure. He was the executive vice president and board chair of the Federalist Society, which has sort of sold itself through the decades as a debating society for conservative lawyers, a place to network and get jobs and debate ideas. But behind the scenes, he's been a dark money master. He has raised an incredible amount of money. Lisa, my partner, who you mentioned at the top, has documented over $600 million that he has leveraged to drive judicial influence, not only selecting Supreme Court justices, but also, planting the seeds of these fake made-up doctrines that make their way to the court through public interest groups, quote unquote, public interest groups that take these doctrines and litigate with them before judges that they have, through this network placed on the bench to really reshape American constitutional law. And now we're starting to learn more about Leo and his web of influence. Clarence Thomas, who, is an old friend of Leo, helped get him confirmed, has called him the third most important person in the United States. We can't underestimate the extent of this guy's power and influence, particularly after we learned in 2021, he received the biggest dark money wealth transfer in United States history, as far as we know, $1.6 billion. And what he's doing with that money now is, really beyond the pale. We learned recently from Axios that, he's taking this $1 billion trust and he's directing these C3 taxpayer subsidized charitable groups to weaponize Christian ideas. And so this idea that, the Federalist Society and originalism are about ideas and principle, is really kind of, becoming exposed as they, increasingly, now that they have this power entrenched in the Supreme Court, lean into a far-right, radical, theocratic, and anti-democratic agenda.
I'll share with our viewers here, when I was in Georgetown Law, I was recruited to be in the Federalist Society, and it's a path, as it's advertised to you, to get these big jobs. You have lots of law debt, and this is, you're like, how am I going to repay this law debt? I lasted one meeting in a class that was taught by a former Bush Solicitor General and a former General Counsel of Fox who were joint professors of this class. And I'm like, all right, I'm out. I don't know what y'all are talking about. But this stuff is effective, and it actually reaches law students who then go and run up the ranks. And it would have been an entirely different career path for me had I perhaps stuck it out. And I didn't even know what I was doing. I was just going to law school, and I thought this was a path to get better jobs. Now, let's talk, though, about the connections here between Opus Dei, now that we know what that is, Leonard Leo. How is Opus Dei and Leonard Leo hand to hand, shoulder to shoulder now in this effort to reshape our judiciary?
Yeah, so one of the things Opus Dei is great at is deceit and subterfuge and cloaking of what it's really doing. And so it's very hard to sort of know who is sort of formally in Opus Dei or who is not. They have numeraries, people that are, the real elite of Opus Dei that live in residences and take vows of chastity and poverty and are, basically served by these numerary assistants. That's a big part of this book, about this kind of web of what seems very clearly to meet the definition of the UN's human trafficking standards. But then they've also got this big web of supernumeraries, people that have families, sort of ordinary Catholics who get brought into Opus Dei, help contribute money to the organization, and do this work in their sort of day-to-day lives. And Leonard Leo, whether he's a supernumerary or a collaborator, which is another thing that we know about, is deeply connected to Opus Dei, mostly through a place in DC called the Catholic Information Center. And this founder of Opus Dei, this priest who is now sainted, was recognized with sainthood, always wanted to really build power and influence in the United States. And after his death, that vision really emerged, particularly in Washington, D.C., through the Catholic Information Center, and a priest there named Father John McCloskey, who himself was kind of run out of town because of a sex abuse scandal, but was incredibly successful at converting folks and bringing them into this fold. And Leonard Leo was one of them. He was, brought in and recently recognized with an evangelization award from the Catholic Information Center. Other folks connected to it include Kevin Roberts, who takes daily or weekly mass, I believe, at the Catholic Information Center. The head of Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation. Bill Barr is connected to this. Pat Cipollone, the former Trump White House counsel. And so here you see this strategy of really kind of infiltrating the centers of power and having this vision of a theocratic future installed in our levers of power and implemented by these power centers. And Trump really is sort of just a vessel for this, but you can see how he understands its power, particularly as he starts waving Bibles around and tweeting out sort of Catholic Opus Dei, dog whistles to make clear that he is there for this agenda.
Let's talk about, now that we know what Opus Dei is, now that we know Leonard Leo, now that we know the connection, the impact, how has this impacted rulings that we may have seen in the past several years? How is this likely to impact rulings over the coming years?
Yeah, so it's really, you can see the fingerprints of this agenda all over what the court is doing, particularly in the context of women's reproductive freedoms. Overturning Roe versus Wade was the chief priority, I believe, of Leonard Leo and his power building network. Of course, he was happy to, find justices who would, deliver financial returns for these billionaires that were funding so much of this effort. But, he wants to stop woke ideology. That's what he talks about, weaponized conservative ideas. So beyond the attacks on women's reproductive freedoms, we've also seen, a huge diminishment of the separation of church and state, the attack on the Establishment Clause, which prohibits the establishment of religion by government. That's going away to the extent it's not already largely gone. We're going to start seeing cases, and we already have, that sort of move closer and closer to direct taxpayer subsidy of religion, and exemptions for religious organizations that want to not comply with discrimination laws or other generally applicable laws. So this agenda is very much underway. One other important detail, I wrote about this recently in Courier, is the idea of fetal personhood, which is a big issue in this election, though it's not really being talked about very much. We see Trump running away as far as he can from the idea of a national abortion ban, saying they want to leave it to states. We've seen the Republican platform, the RNC platform, sort of remove the idea that we need a constitutional amendment to get rid, to ban abortion nationwide, and take away a call for a national abortion ban. But what they've been doing, and what Opus Dei connected scholars have been doing, is disseminating this idea of fetal personhood, the idea that the 14th Amendment protects a fetus's life. And we've had Supreme Court justices use language that signals support for this idea, even call for it explicitly. A lot of the judges that Leo has put on the bench are moving toward this. Folks like Kazmarek, Amul Thapar in the Sixth Circuit, they have cited this Opus Dei scholar, Robert George, who's a Princeton professor, deeply connected to Opus Dei and their finances, though he has denied that, citing this idea of fetal personhood so that eventually they hope to get to a constitutionalized national abortion ban that would, once again, sort of outsource the dirty work of the Republican Party's anti-abortion agenda to the unelected, unaccountable courts.
Governor Walz famously said, who sits around at a bar and actually discusses these types of ideas and who wants these ideas? Well, they may not be sitting around at a bar, but they're sitting around somewhere. And I think we know who these people are now who are discussing these ideas. He's described them as weird, which was an appealing framing. However, this is dangerous stuff, and there are people sitting around talking about this. And oftentimes when you hear Donald Trump and MAGA talk about deep state and things like that, everything they say is projection, because they've got this network right here that's quite literally infiltrating our institutions. Finally, we've done descriptive. Let's be prescriptive. Court accountability is on the front lines of trying to not just label what's happening, but to stop it and to have a better, fair law and order judiciary. So leave us with some hope if you can. What is the path forward? What can we do?
So, so much of what we do at Court Accountability is to sort of help Americans understand the real kind of story of what's going on here, how things came to be this way, and then that really empower ourselves, empower our communities, empower movements to see these connections and start to advocate for meaningful change. I think Democrats have been really shy to touch anything like this. We saw it with Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation to the Seventh Circuit when Dianne Feinstein, observed that, the dogma lives loudly with her in her because of her affiliation with another extremist Catholic sect. And that didn't go over well, right? She was accused of anti-Catholic bigotry, which is really the classic Opus Dei playbook when they come under scrutiny, and we're already seeing it now. But I think what that does is it obscures the truth of what's happening here, and it keeps us from being able to see these connections and mobilize ourselves against them. And from this understanding, what we hope to really drive and grow is a movement that pushes Congress to do better on this stuff. Folks like Jamie Raskin really get it. He's willing to look at these Christian nationalist influences behind January 6th, behind the judicial coup attempts that we see ongoing now, and call it for what it is. And we need more like him, and we need people to raise their voices up, amplify these stories, get in touch with their members of Congress, push for meaningful oversight of these dark money influence channels, which I think will start building momentum toward real reform. Things that the Congress can very much do within its constitutional purview to check this court, to reduce the power that the court has taken for itself away from the people, to allow democracy really to thrive and flourish. And that's what we really need to be pushing for and demanding, because otherwise we're going to be living in a permanently entrenched minoritarian state. It's like the far right Catholic Taliban is basically what they're pushing for us to live under. And we've got a moment here. We've still got plenty of time and room to make our voices heard and to see the change we need in the world.
Look, I often get asked, what's the future of MeidasTouch? And to me, the future is very strong, and our future is going to be a lot more coverage like this as we're in 2025, 2026, and beyond. So you go back to the beginning of this interview where I talked about, and other interviews where I talk about how this stuff has been percolating for generations. It's so important that, look, we obviously have immediate rapid response that needs to happen, but all of the stuff that you've mentioned has happened generationally. You mentioned this movement starting in the 1920s of these attempts to then kind of infiltrate here. So this is going to be a long-term effort together. We're in it together. And Alex, I hope you'll not just come back on the MeidasTouch network. We launched a Legal AF network that's growing rapidly, that's getting almost as many views as we're getting here. So our platforms are always open to you and your whole team. You just tell us when. I'll introduce you to Michael Popak, and we'll have you on that channel as well.
That sounds awesome. And also, one last thing, buy this book. It is like quite a read. I have, for a nonfiction book, it is a page turner. So don't miss it. It's out yesterday.
It hopefully sold itself from the interview itself. But if not, everybody make sure you get it. It's by Gareth Gore, Opus. Buy it, read it, tell us about it, comment on it. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks a lot.
Hit subscribe. Let's get to 4 million subscribers.
Real quick, Meta just changed their algorithm to suppress political content. Please follow our Instagram at MeidasTouch right now as we head towards 400,000 followers so you don't miss a beat.